Hello, Selling Jesus listeners. Scott Holman here, your host of the Selling Jesus podcast. Today I have another great story to share with you, and it's very similar to one of my favorites in the Bible. I'm talking about the story found in Acts where Paul, the apostle, had no interest in Christ. In fact, his sole purpose was to persecute others. But when he least expected it, Christ found him. And this story is very similar, as our guest, Kim Bond, really had no interest in finding Jesus, but when she was least expecting it, Jesus called out to her. But before we dive into that story, I have another request. If you would please like the Facebook page at facebook.com/ISellJesus, that allows me to be able to keep you up to date on any podcast release or any type of resource that you may find useful, helping you share your faith with others. And as always, your subscribes and reviews on iTunes are greatly appreciated. With all that said, let's dive into this story. Kim, I want to thank you for joining us today and being willing to share your story. But before we get started, can you tell us just a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I'm married to a great guy, and we have two amazing kids. I work a full-time job in business, but I like to write in my spare time. I'm passionate about poetry, but most of all, I just like writing about Jesus.
So you're a writer. I'm not even sure I knew that about you. So tell me a little more about this poetry or some of the other writings. I mean, do you publish any of them, or is it just for yourself?
Yeah, I share them. I have a website. It's drawneartochrist.com. I've got, sometimes it's just my poetry. It's usually my poetry in the blog, but I have published some anthologies and different things, some short stories of myself and other poets and writers. So it's pretty interesting.
Awesome. So the website's drawneartochrist.com. You have some of your writings out there and you blog on a regular basis. Have you ever shared your story yet, or is this the first time that you're sharing your story to a public space?
No, I have shared it through a publication or two, my own publication, and then a literary magazine. I've shared it on YouTube. I went to Russia and shared it there. That was probably the first time I shared it in a real public place. But yeah, I've shared it with a few people.
I got to tell you, you're nearing the 10th interview that I've recorded. And one of the things I've got to tell you is you're the first professional storyteller I have then when it comes to sharing your story. So I'm excited to hear it.
Don't expect too much. Just an average person,
We all are, and that's the important part. We are all just human beings doing our best to serve an awesome God that we've grown to love. I feel that every story starts at the very beginning, and so that's where I would like to start, and let's dive right in. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, and always specifically, was Christ a part of it or not?
Well, I came from a very loving family, but my parents married young, and they divorced before I even turned a year old. So I would say the lack of a father in my household played a major part in my view of God, which at one point was a complete disbelief in God. I knew the gospel. I had been told it. We didn't attend church, but I did know the gospel. But I just couldn't bring myself to believe in it.
So, were you raised in church?
Not at all. We had visited church. I visited church a few times with my grandparents, and I don't even think that it was, a church that believed in the Trinity. I'm not really sure. I had visited Catholic church a few times. Definitely not raised in the church. I could probably put on one or at most two hands the amount of times I went to church during my childhood.
So how did you ultimately become aware of the gospel, at least if it wasn't through a church setting?
Well, my grandmothers, they both believed. I had one that was wheelchair bound and one that lived far away, but they both did believe. And I think at one point a grandmother gave me a Bible, and I really didn't use it, but I did. I knew the gospel, I guess, just from being told by my grandmothers.
So that's kind of the foundational aspect of your life growing up. You didn't have much of a church environment. I find out through most of the stories that we start developing a belief system somewhere in our junior high years and our high school years. So can we just kind of step up to that point and tell me, what was life like as you start going through these formative years of, again, the middle school and high school aspects of life?
We were moving back and forth between two different states, and my dad lived in Missouri, but we moved back and forth between St. Louis and Atlanta. At certain points in time, I wasn't in a lot of contact with my dad. My mom worked a lot because we weren't getting child support, so she was working a lot, and I started working really young too. It just seemed like we were always on the go. There wasn't even a lot of family contact. I don't feel like, I was at school or at work, and my mom felt like it seemed like she was always at work, and it was just a go, go, go environment. And in high school, I really started to kind of rebel. I mean, I'd like to say I fell into the wrong crowd, but I was the wrong crowd. So, I mean, really, I was leading it up, just that kind of rebellion, kind of, rebellion against society, rebellion just against, everything, myself.
Just kind of curious, what do you think led to that rebellion? Do you think it was just, I'm young and I want to rebel, or was there something deeper in there that you felt made you just angry enough to rebel?
I feel like it was all on a very subconscious level. I really felt restrained in high school. I felt like, I had matured quite a bit, just being on my own a lot as growing up, and people just mature at different levels. But I didn't really like being in the high school atmosphere where it felt like people were telling us what to do all of the time. And I felt like I could make my own decisions, and it just felt really repressive to me. I might have had some anger about, just things going on in my personal life that I just didn't even take time to reflect on or even consider, because like I said, it all feels like it was all on a subconscious level. It wasn't until I met Christ till I started to realize and look back that, wait a minute, maybe some of this had to do with what was going on in my family and my own personal life, instead of necessarily, just stuff that happened. So, I mean, I think I had an illumination when I came to know Christ, but during those years, I wasn't really sure. I was just acting out.
Understand. And, we're going to have to touch on this here in a little bit as the story continues to unfold. But there are many in society who would say that by following Christ, you give up all your freedom to be yourself. That, in fact, the Bible says we become slaves of Christ. And so many would say that when you follow Christ, you're no longer under your own ability to do your own thing. And it's kind of interesting as you explain what happened in high school. It sounds like you just, because of your maturity, did not enjoy being under authority.
Right, and I think part of when I came to know Christ, it was understanding that His authority was righteous, and I honestly, although we're under His authority and we're servants of Christ, He will give you a lot of room to make your own mistakes and learn from your own consequences. So I've never ever felt oppressed under Christ. I've definitely felt freedom, and in fact, He's set me free from a lot of addictions and other things. It definitely was more of a freedom, even though I'm under the authority of God.
No, absolutely. And I'm typically wouldn't dive into this so early in the episode because I really want to hear the actual entire story. But I think it's important because they have an incorrect view of who God really is. And God gives us a footprint or a blueprint. He gives us a layout of what a good life should look like. And it's not necessarily a good life because, well, this is just what He wants it to be. It's a good life because it's a great life to live. And it's exciting that you just mentioned the free will. I mean, he's laid it out, but He gives us the ability to make our own decisions and make our own mistakes and make our own good decisions. And ultimately, there's freedom in just knowing that when we make a mistake, that he's there to pick us up. That's at least my opinion.
Right, absolutely. And he's picked me up many times.
Right there with you. Well, let's keep diving in. You shared your story briefly on YouTube. I've had a chance to view that, and in that, you kind of walk us pretty quickly to a time in college. So we're going to jump now. We know you rebelled a bit. We didn't get into any details of the rebellion. If you choose to share that in your story, so be it. But I'm jumping to college right now. Bring me to the point of what started drawing you to Christ, or maybe right before you started being drawn to Christ.
Well, a friend had been talking to me about Christ while I was in college, and I really respected this friend, but I just could not believe what he said. And he was a Jesus freak. He talked about Jesus all of the time, every time we were together. And I just got to the point where I just couldn't hear it anymore. I didn't believe it, and I didn't want to hear about it. So I had decided in my mind I'm going to sit down and write him a letter to say, we can't even, I just don't want to be friends with you anymore. I can't, I'm not interested in Jesus the way you are. And I just don't feel like we have that much in common. So I sat down, I wrote the entire letter. I was good with it. And I started to walk away, and I walked, I was at home by myself. I walked into the kitchen, and suddenly I heard this booming voice tell me, God is real and the Bible is truth. And it was more than a voice. It was a presence that I felt. I had tingles. I was hot all over. I just knew someone was standing there with me that I couldn't see. And I just became a Christian in that instant. I just needed to know that he was real, and whatever that supernatural occurrence was that happened that day with me was enough for me to believe. So I believed just like that.
So really, it's a what I call a Saul to Paul like conversion that we read about in the Bible.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. I feel like I'm tapping the brake a little bit because I want to get to this, but I want to make sure I've got this covered. So you got this friend that's talking to you about Jesus, but you mentioned you were resistant to it. You didn't want anything to do with it. You didn't believe it. What was going on there? Was it just an academic aspect that you just could not wrap your head around God being real? What was your reason for being so cautious or even resistant to God?
It just seemed like a fairy tale. Nothing in my life had gone really that well. And it just seemed like it was too good to be true. In my mind, I thought we die, we go into the ground, and that's it. We've got this one shot here on earth. And some of my past experiences reflected that. I really felt like I had to live for the day. I tried to take in as much experiences as I could. And every day, I partied and I drank and smoked and I wasn't a drug addict. That's not my story. That's not my testimony. But I was really living for the day. And after I became to Christ, I realized, there is eternity to live. I don't have to live for today. I've got all of eternity, so I can say no to some of those experiences. And like I said, he's helped me out of some addictions that I felt trapped in. But yeah, that's he really rescued me from just that lack of hope that I had to hold on to. Like I said, I really feel like it goes back to there being no father in my household. I kept in contact with him. I loved my dad. He's gone on to heaven now, but it just, without him being there, especially after we had moved some states away from him, there wasn't a lot of contact between us. Luckily, I got to know him again before he died. But I think that really subconsciously played into that fact. I can't think of any other reason, and I feel like that's what God has illuminated to me, is that lack of a father that really played into my disbelief.
Quite frankly, the last two testimonies that I have been able to record have both mentioned the role of the father in their earthly father in their relationship with their heavenly father. And what's interesting is the story's a little different, but it seems that there is a definite correlation for fathers in the impact they have with their children and their relationship with Christ, or God being our Father. I'm basically saying this right now, just kind of publicly to everyone. Maybe there'll be a future episode on it, but if you're a dad and you're listening to this, your role is critical. If you have a desire for your child to follow Christ, to live for God, there's a big weight that falls on your shoulders, and it's being proven out in these stories. And we are the leader. We're the leader of our household, we're the leader of our children, and we must step up and lead them both physically, spiritually, emotionally, all of the above, so that they have the best chance of living that life that we desire them to live for God.
Amen. So true.
Hey, Kim, I want to summarize again. You've done a great job, and I'm not trying to make up the entire story. I'm trying to summarize what I've heard, and this is really just from a relatability standpoint. If there's a listener that's in the similar scenario as you, and they're asking the questions that maybe you were asking. So here's kind of my summary of the story. You sounds like you were raised in a good home, but because of your father not being around, your mom worked a lot, you had to take on a responsibility of probably being an adult or like an adult at too early of an age. In that environment, life wasn't perfect. It wasn't fairy tale. Not necessarily bad, but there was nothing good about it. It was just life. And it sounds to me that that was really it. You already said there was a lack of hope. You felt life was just a journey of a bunch of moments, good moments, bad moments, but nothing great. Is that a reasonable summary?
Right. That's absolutely true.
So you end up in college, you're going through these series of moments. You have this friend who is sharing the gospel with you. You're resistant, you're frustrated, you're mad, you write this letter. And if I understood it correctly, this conversion moment happened right after you wrote that letter?
Right, because I feel like I was blocking off. I had shut down that one person who was speaking truth into my life, just really honestly and really boldly, and I was resisting it. Just when he started talking about Jesus, we would just kind of, combat back and forth, and argue. I would say my point of view, which was, it was just I didn't have a lot of really true good Christian people in my life where I had a good reflection of Christians in general. But this guy, he actually had been recently converted himself, if I can remember the story right. He actually was more tempted to think there was more than one God, and he had somebody talking to him, and he said, God, if you're real, the real God of Abraham, then send the shooting star. And at that moment, the brightest shooting star that he ever saw in his entire life had shot before him. But when he was talking to me, that was a real recent experience in his life. So I feel like he was more worldly like me. He was somebody that I respected that was really on my same level. He was a brand new Christian and still was kind of living the life that I was living. So when we were talking, I really related to him. You're just never too early of a Christian to start talking to people, because God has people right at your level that he wants you to talk to. But at any point, even though he was the best vessel that to come to me, I just couldn't hear it. I didn't believe it. There was no man on earth or woman who could have really preached the truth into my life in a way that I could have accepted it. I was stubborn, and I really needed God to tell me himself in some way, in some supernatural way, to come get me and just to really prove that he was real, and that he was willing to do that. He was willing to go there and take that step to really show himself. And instant love, I'm completely smitten.
That's awesome. I love it. And I know I keep going back. Don't get too mad at me here, but you keep bringing up some amazing stuff. This guy that was talking to you, I think often as Christians, we tend to think that we need to know our Bible better before we can really share it or teach others about it. And I personally believe that the moment you need to start telling others about Jesus or sharing what you learn is immediately. I think that leads you to having to learn more because you don't want to find yourself caught without an answer. But what I really liked about this guy was not living a perfect life yet. He had started his journey with Christ, but he had not mastered it by any means. He was sharing this newfound love that he had with you. Are you saying that you were not looking at him as a hypocrite at that time because you recognized where he was at in his walk and appreciated him sharing his faith even where he was at that moment? That is what I heard, correct?
Right, right. And I don't know if I would have sat down with somebody who had been a Christian for a long time and knew all the answers. I knew him quite a while before he had become a Christian, so I knew him, well. There were a few Christians in my life, but it just felt like there was too much of a difference between them and me for me to really identify with them. So, yeah. I felt like this guy was a really good choice for God to send along.
Absolutely. And with the whole selling Jesus thing that we're moving forward with and some of the different modules I use to help us all become better at sharing our faith, I think you just nailed something. And that's the reality is we relate with different people differently. Scott Holman, I don't relate to everybody. I can't relate to everybody. My experience is different. My perception of the world is different. And Kim Bond, your experience and your relationships and your perceptions are different. That's why we all must be doing our job. We all must be sharing. And there's times it's going to feel like we strike out, quite frankly, but that's okay. You're still a part of that story, and God will bring the right people across the paths. But we can't assume that it's not us. It may be us that relates as well. So, very interesting component you just threw in there about the relatability standpoint.
Mhm. Yep.
The other question I have then is, do you feel that this moment that happened in your apartment or your dorm room that we're getting ready to dive into it deeply, God is all powerful, so I don't want to take anything away from him, but do you feel that you would have been ready to embrace that moment if your friend had not been talking to you up to that point?
Um, I have never really thought about that. That's a good question. I don't really know. I didn't At that point in time, I really wasn't giving any thought to God at all. It was a much earlier time in my life when I had decided in my own mind God is not real, and I didn't. And I really regret this because I think I could have stumbled onto the truth, maybe possibly on my own, if I had looked into it, if I had sought God out, if I had looked into prophecy, if I had looked into, archaeological evidence, if I had just looked into what God has to offer us. But in my mind, the Bible was just a book written by men. I didn't know that much about it, and I didn't want to get to know about it. I had already, in my mind, decided that God wasn't real. He wasn't up there, and what everybody else was living, which I lived a quiet atheism. And, there are closet atheists out there, and I would consider myself one of them. I wasn't going telling, everybody I don't believe in God. To me, I was just keeping that to myself, and I didn't really even want anybody to know about it. But I thought, well, it's good that these people believe that, they have something, to hope in. It makes them feel better when their families die, but I couldn't believe it myself, but I didn't sing it from the rooftops that I didn't believe in God. And I wasn't looking into God or seeking him out or asking him. I wasn't asking to meet him in prayer or, for God to send any miraculous signs to me like my friend had. I just didn't know God. I didn't even think that there was a small chance that God was out there. So I don't know how I would have perceived that if someone hadn't been talking to me beforehand. It was nice. It was kind of before Jesus came, then we had John the Baptist, kind of announcing the way, and that's kind of how I look back on that experience.
Yeah, and I think really the point I'm hoping to make is, again, this friend, he was not the reason you came to know Christ. He was not the reason you made that decision. Yet at the same time, he may have been the reason because you may not have accepted what God did for you. And I just don't want any Christian or any follower of Christ discounting their impact on someone else, whether that be a meeting with a stranger, a friend, a family member. Often we can get discouraged by feeling like we're not making that big of an impact. But I really do wonder if your friend had not been willing to step up, if this would have had the impact it had and changed your life.
Well, I'll tell you something else because my story kind of stopped whenever, I realized that God was real. So I'll fast forward to after that. And that's where my friend really played into it. I never gave him the letter. I told him what happened. And after that, then, we went to being friends and we began talking about Jesus all of the time. So we continued on our friendship instead of me ending it. And he led me to a great church. He helped me read through the scripture. And at some point we stopped becoming friends, but he really kind of discipled me to the point where he got me on the right track to where, he could let go. And I wasn't, just coming up with ideas about God in my own mind. He was showing me to other people. He was discipling me till I got on the right track.
That's awesome. Really awesome. Well, you've mentioned some things here, Kim, that strike me that you're what I would consider an intellectual Christian, meaning that you have studied what many would call the apologetics, or the factual evidence of prophecy, the factual evidence of the Bible and how it came together. And I have high respect for the intellectual Christian, and I kind of got quote marks going when I call it that. Because you have emotional Christians, which base their belief system based on what they know, just from their experience with God. What's really cool to me with your story is, again, I consider you an intellectual based on what I hear, but this moment, this conversion-like moment, really was more emotional. It was something you heard. It was real, but it's kind of hard for you to tell that story to others and let them, lead them to factual evidence. This is just your story.
Right. And I mean, that's really what I feel for God. I feel, an absolute love, and you can get to know that God is real intellectually, but that love really starts right there in your heart. And, yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't know, after knowing what I know now, I feel like I might have gotten to the point where I believed that God was real if I had looked into it and seeked it out. But I don't know if I would have fallen head over heels in love with him if I didn't just meet him. And it wasn't a one-time thing. He meets me regularly. It may not be a booming voice. It might be a whisper. It might be, just something I feel in my heart that he's doing. But I know him on an emotional level, and I know his word on an intellectual level. I know that it's true. And I can point others, emotionally and intellectually towards Christ. And, like you said, you plant seeds, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future if someone else is going to come along and watch those seeds bloom. But yeah,
It is
it's
so awesome.
an emotional and an intellectual thing.
It really is. And thank you for saying that. I didn't have to say it, but I believe the walk is both, and it comes down to the heart. And the one thing that I've really come to learn in this process with the Selling Jesus podcast is the understanding that many atheists are going to, they try to utilize the intellectual and the factual evidence to discount why God's not real, why you are making a foolish decision in some cases. But what's amazing to me is I look at my life and every person I know that is following Christ. The reality is it is our story, which is why I'm excited about this podcast. We highlight the stories, and you cannot take the story away from me. You cannot take the conversations I've had with God away from me. And I know you may not understand it, and I'm okay with you not understanding it, but all I'm telling you is God is real. He's my friend. He's my father, and I just know it. And that's my story. You can't take it away from me.
Right. Absolutely. I feel the same way.
It is very evident. But let's keep walking. So you had this experience. What was life like? Did you just flip a switch? Paul in the Bible, he had Jesus speak down to him on that journey. He was instantly changed. Was yours similar, or was your change still a journey and a process?
Some things were instant and some things were gradual. I instantly wanted to change. So I started, going to church. I started reading the Bible. I did everything that I thought that a Christian should do. But God was telling me, no, that's on the outer level. That's top level stuff. We're gonna go deeper. We're gonna, you're gonna you're gonna learn some humility and some other things. And he really showed me that it's whatever happens isn't going to happen just on the outside. It's going to be some deep cuts, and all of those weren't very pleasant, and they were a process over years. And some of the addictions stopped immediately, and some carried on for many years after that. And that God's still working on me. I'm definitely not to the point where I feel 100% Christ-like right now. But I know that from where I started to where I am right now, it's a 180 for me. To me, it seems like, oh, I can't even believe that was me. I guess that was over 20 years ago that happened. But it's just hard to believe. There's really a point in my life where I say before Christ and after Christ, and I can see a major difference.
Absolutely. You know, I'd like to ask a question. You mentioned that God wanted you to go deeper, and I'm going to encourage you to go a little deeper on this podcast with us. I've many times compared your conversion to that of Paul. And in the writings of Paul, we hear him make a comparison to the thorn in his flesh, the thorn in his side, the aggravation. And there's a lot of different theological understandings of what this may be. And really, I don't know if any of us fully know. But some would say that it could have just been struggles that Paul was having both or in that day. Some say it could have been a struggle from his previous life that he was working through. Let's go deep. What was probably the biggest struggle that you had post conversion of God really saying, I want you to be different, and that journey of getting there? Can you tell us one of those things that was just difficult, but walk us through that path?
I had mentioned that the humility, and I mentioned that because I really feel like that was the biggest thing. I had become really arrogant. I mean, I did well in school, and I depended on myself, my own maturity, my own decisions, and I had really kind of ruled myself without thinking that God was there. I made every decision based on what I wanted to do, and I mean, I cared about people, and I really didn't want to hurt anyone else, but I was okay with kind of harming myself. I don't want to read that much into it, but I mean, you can tell by the way I treated my body. I drank and I smoked and everything. And I was treating myself badly, and I was depending on myself. I didn't feel insecure. I mean, it's that strange thing that happens with people where they're kind of arrogant, yet at the same time insecure. And that kind of, duality, it just ruins you in the inside. It just rots you. So, I mean, I felt like he kind of brought that together to where I came down, in arrogance and living in submission to him, and just realizing I wasn't in control of my life. Worrying and doing things, I just wasn't. I wasn't in control of my life, and I needed to learn that. And on the other side of being insecure is not relying on myself for my provision or whatever. And that's still something that I kind of, I still worry day to day about provision and whatever else, but I needed him to close that gap. And I feel like the gap's getting smaller and smaller to where I'm less dependent on myself and less arrogant and less trying to rule my own world, and where I'm dependent on him to make opportunities for me in my life, to provide for me. And once that insecurity and arrogance gap closes, I feel like, I will just be one whole person, but I feel a little fragmented, but not near as much as I did. But that's what I felt like what he was working on during those first few years of just closing that gap of arrogance and insecurity.
The life with Christ is a journey, and I just want to encourage any listener right now that if you're struggling with something, and I hesitate to even call it a sin. We like to look at sins and addictions and call those out, and you'll hear a lot of that in these testimonies and these stories we listen to. But the reality is, with God, He's always just trying to get us to grow. So whatever that issue is that you're struggling with, have hope that God's just working on you. And I had a mental picture. I tend to do some home renovations from time to time, and I'm cheap, so I often will paint. And my wife Michelle and I will work together. She does the trim work, and I'll take the roller and I'll start doing the easy job. And after you're done painting, I'm pretty sloppy, so I typically have paint all over myself. And I got a mental picture there of myself bathing, and I see the big splotch of paint, and I work to get that off. And that takes the majority of my time. And there's always a bit of frustration when I think I'm clean and I look over at my elbow and I see something that's a little smaller, but it's still a blotch. It's still a spot of paint that needs to get out of there. And I feel like that's how our walk with Christ is. We never reach perfection. It's just we scrub through one thing only to realize, oh, there's another one. And but that's the intent. We're just getting better each day and just growing in the sincerity of it. So humility seemed to be your big splotch. Is splotch a word? I'm not really sure. Humility seemed to be the big spot. And then it sounds like that God's still working with you on smaller items each day.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. He is working on me in gentle ways. So, at first I felt like he was like, we need some major changes, and it was major renovation. But now I feel like it's, we've gotten through the really hard stuff, and now it's touch-ups. So, yeah.
The small details.
And gentle. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I like to kind of get to the point of who are you today, because we've talked about your past. We talked about how you came to Christ, and we talked about this journey that you've been on in your growth. But, if you were just to share today, who is Kim Bond today, and who are you in Christ?
I am someone who just who loves God. I like to always, He is my focus. My focus is on Christ and only on Him. There's nothing I'd rather do than share Christ with other people, just waiting for those opportunities where it's not weird or awkward, where it just kind of comes up in conversation. Like I said, I like to write. That's giving me the microphone, and I can say whatever I want. And if anybody's interested, they can look on it. And if they're not, then they can look away. So it's never awkward when I write. That's why I love to write.
Absolutely. So you're writing and sharing any opportunity God gives you. And, I'm going to go through your batch of writings as well, or maybe you can send me some if you think any would match up well to what we're doing here with Selling Jesus. I would love to post some of them in a blog type format, or share them with the listeners. So I put that out to you right now to feel free to send your stuff on over.
Sounds good.
Well, that's who you are today. I often ask, who do you see yourself becoming? And I get the feeling that the answer would be the same. You see yourself becoming someone who loves God, whose focus is on God, and someone who shares the love of God any chance you get. And it's just a pleasure to know you, Kim. And really, you're one of those people who I have to put in the category of, I think we know of each other, but we've never really had a great opportunity to get to know each other. And just hearing the story, it's been a great experience for me, just getting to know you a little deeper, and my appreciation for who you are. is so much greater right now. I know you appreciate and have grown to appreciate many along your life. We spent some time on the friend in college, but as we near an end of this episode, are there some other influencers along the way who have just impacted you in your journey that you would like to call out publicly and just let them know how you feel about them?
Well, really, any friends that go to church, and I would say that all of them who just keep regularly attending church with me, um, I really appreciate that. It's seeing them keep going, even through whatever problems they're going through. They keep going, and it helps me to keep going too, because I know my inner problems, um, but seeing them, they're coming through things that are even harder than what I'm going through, and they keep going, and it just makes me know that I can keep going. And really everyone. And I want to say what a lovely experience it has been to get to know you, Scott. You've done so much for our family over the years in the kids ministry. So I just really appreciate that. Your faith is so obvious in just saying hello. So, but it was good to get to know you on a deeper level as well.
I appreciate that. You know, you did lead me to another question, though, and it's this. There are many who would say one of the reasons they struggle with following Christ is hypocrites. People who wear a mask and try to come off as being perfect, yet deep down they're not, and they know that about these people. How how did you go about finding people who are genuine, that have problems and are open with problems, and they're not rationalizing their problems, as an excuse, but they're trying to grow. But how did you find these people so that you can grow along with them?
I definitely church. I feel like we have a great church. And if you can ever just get beyond that, hi, hello, and get into a home group, or some any opportunities that we have for prayer, just to pray for the really deep things in their life, then we scratch the surface. And I feel like that's all you really need to do to get to most Christians who you can get to that genuine level with them by talking more deeply with them. I think the worst thing is to know them on a shallower level and just assume, oh, everything's perfect in their life, they have it all together, or and they're just judging other people who aren't like them. A lot of times you can just, what if you get to know them a little bit more, you can understand that they're struggling with some real things. They might be different real things, they might be the same. They might have a background that's not, they didn't grow up in the church either. And I love to know what they're going through. I haven't met one Christian yet who's living a perfect life, or who isn't going through problems. But that's what I identify with, when they reveal their problems, reveal what's going on in their lief with their kids. If they have kids who've walked away from the faith, a lot of times I just encourage them, you never know what God's going to do. God can bring them around. It doesn't matter how far off they are. In an instant, God could bring them around. I know, because he's done that with me.
Yeah, and actually, I always like to remind parents that God does keep. And one of the very first episodes of this podcast, as well as the videos online, is just my story. And I do want to be very clear, in no way am I perfect and never have been perfect. And I'm constantly growing as well. But at the same time, I was raised in church, raised in a great environment, and never really strayed from my following of Christ. Again, made lots of mistakes along the journey, but I've never walked away from my faith in Jesus. And that's important. I just want parents to always know that the outcome of walking away does not have to be the outcome. God is also a keeping God, and loves to take young people on through their life into adulthood. So, Kim, I'm going to end with one final question. And it may throw you just a little bit, but I don't think it's going to. And it's in some ways not fair, because I haven't asked you to plan this or prepare this. We have just a few minutes left. Your passion for Christ is just evident in this episode. Take 2 or 3 minutes for the person who may be listening right now, who they have yet to make a decision to follow Christ. maybe they are similar to how you were back in college. Can you take the 2 or 3 minutes and just share what God has done for you, why you're different, and why it's a good decision for them?
Um, sure. I would say to that person, really, God is just waiting outside that door, just waiting for you to open it. I mean, He asks you to ask, seek, and knock, and I really think that if you do and you open that door to Him, that you will have a much brighter future. I know that when you're walking away from Christ, you're facing so many things. You're facing loneliness. Because you feel like you're the only one on the earth that knows what's going on, but God can just reach inside your heart and know what you're going through. He can comfort you. He can help you with those struggles, the struggles that you cannot do on your own. He can come in and He can fix those in an instant. Sometimes they might not be instantly, but He has the ability to fix them, and He will figure out the best way to do that in your life. And He wants to love you, and I think we all have room for more love in our lives, and He will not only love you, but He'll enable you to love others the way you want to love them, your kids or your parents or even the enemies in your life. He can open up that door to where you can forgive and just let go, and that burden that you carry around that feels so heavy, like the weight of the world on your shoulders, He says, my burden is light. So I just would strongly recommend that you take that easy step to really let Christ in, and your life will be radically changed.
Amen. I lied. I have one more question.
Okay.
This one's simple. You mentioned your upbringing, and you said your biggest struggle is you did not feel there was any hope. With Christ, is there hope?
Oh, there's tons of hope. If you take a look in the back of Revelation and see the description of heaven, and to me, we can talk about pearly gates and streets of gold, but that's not at all what I'm looking forward to. I am looking forward to knowing Christ and being with Him, and if I have Him with me, that is all that I need. I really don't need any of that other stuff. I have the hope of knowing God's true and great love to me on an even bigger level for eternity. That's hope enough for me to get through this entire life.
Somehow, some way, Jesus Christ fills that void that we're all looking for. It's the hope and peace. I don't understand it, but it's good enough for me. Kim, it's good enough for you, and that's our story. You can't take it away from us, and we're going to stick with it. Kim, I thank you for your time today. I thank you for sharing this story, and I just look forward to, again, getting to know you and your family at a deeper level at this point going forward. And so that's our commitment. We have to make sure we do that. And again, just want to thank you for your time on the episode.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It's been a pleasure.